Hello, my name is Megan Darner. I'm going to be doing my teaching simulation for Standard 3.8 for grade 3 in writing. So this standard is about teaching kids the cursive writing. So most of the children should know from second grade how cursive letters are to look. They just might not be as fluent in writing them. So for the simulation, how I would start with my beginning launch hook anticipatory set, I would have them come in from recess or come in for the morning, wherever we're at, we're in the lesson for writing, and I would have one of these cards on each desk. So for example, I have the letter F, I have S, and I have Z. So then I would have on the board, I would have the standard lettering written out. So I have F, S, Z here, so that they'll know that letter when they see it coming in. So on their desk, they'll have these little guys. So say someone comes in and I tell them what they're doing. So I want them to look over their letter, think about what letter they have if they don't recognize it. So say we have a kid, he doesn't realize that this is the letter Z. So when I do my come on up game, that's what I'm going to call is the come on up. What I would say is, I have letter Z over here, so I want to have letter Z come on up and show me where their letter goes on the alphabet. I would have all 26 letters. So say I have like Preston. We'll make up Preston. Preston doesn't know that he has letter Z, so I would want him to use context clues to think about what letter he might have. So say we have this might look like an E. Say we have letter E up on the board already. So he says, well, I think this letter looks like an E. So I'd say, okay, Preston, I want you to look at the board to see what letters we already have up, like what students have already put up on the board. And I want you to look at your letter. And then I want you to look at the standard alphabet and compare it. So as he's looking up at the letters, I would hope that he could look at the form of the letter Z starting from left to right, in that it curves up, goes down, curves up, and goes back down, and that he could come to the conclusion that this might be letter Z. So as we start getting the game going, I would say, all right, so I want letter F to come up. And so the student with the letter F, he would be excited. He'd come up to the board and he'd say, I think my letter goes here. And so he would match it up to the correct letter F. I don't know if you can see it very well, but I have it written out over here. And he would put his letter F here. And if he got it wrong, say he thought this was the letter Z, he would put it here. And so we'd say, all right, Tommy, I need you to look back at the letter, and I want you to think about what other letter that could be. So then again, we would have him do context clues. We could have some of his friends help him out, as in the other students. So he says, oh, okay, Miss Darner, I think that this letter might be letter F. So then he goes and puts it on F, and we'd say, yes, that's the letter F. Congrats, Tommy. So then as we go through that process, each student would have a letter, and I say, okay, now come on up, letter S. And same goes, if they didn't know it, we would just give them context clues to try and get them to understanding that letter. So as we go through that, they'd each have their letters up here. And so that would be the come on up game. That's how I would grab their attention, and kind of kickstart the letters. And it would kind of allow me to gauge where the students are at with what letters they know, how much they remember with the cursive alphabet. It can also help the students gauge where we're at, what we're doing, what the lesson we're leading into. So that would help me understand where some of the kids are at, what letters they're struggling with. If one kid didn't know the letter S, then another kid was like, another student said, I don't know what that letter is either. So then I can kind of take note of what students know what letters and what letters they're kind of struggling with, so that I could pay a little bit more attention to those letters as we start beginning to write the words and sentences and then going forward into paragraphs. So that would be my beginning hook. So for the next part of it, I would lead the class in a discussion. So I would want to make an anchor chart with my students. I had kind of started doing it here. This is my makeshift anchor chart. So what it says is the rules of cursive. So with this, I would want to do kind of a think, pair, share. So I would ask what the class thinks the habits are of good handwriting. So I would say, turn to your neighbor. I want you guys to talk about what kind of habits you think you need for cursive handwriting. So I'd have them pair up with their neighbor next to whoever they're sitting by. And so I want them to discuss. So I'd give them a couple of minutes. And then after discussing with their class about their habits, I'd have each person have someone raise their hand and tell me their habit out of their group. And so what I would want from them is I would want to hear what they think, but I also want them to come to the conclusion for at least 4 or 5. One of the most important would be proper posture. So let's say that somebody at the end of the class sharing was close to doing proper posture, like they could say sitting position. So we would say yes, so you would want to sit the right way. You would want to be sitting in your seat properly. So for number 1, we put, get a different marker, this one's running out. For number 1, we'd put proper posture. So we do proper posture. And then towards the end, we can make a little picture for the proper posture on the anchor chart. So we could have like a student sitting at the desk, sitting upright. We could have the seat, sitting straight, and we could have a little stick figure sitting super tall and straight, just to kind of symbolize what that means. So then go to the next person. At some point, I want them to come to the conclusion that slanting your paper is important, because usually with cursive, you have to slant your paper. That's just one of the rules. And that's also one of the things listed in the standard, so I'd want to make sure that my students come to those conclusions. So I'd have, sorry, I have a runny nose, proper posture, slanting your paper. So we'll say number 2 is slant your paper. And then as we keep going, I'd want them to make sure that we have proper posture, the position of your paper. So we want it to be slanted. We could do like a picture of a paper slanted left, right, whichever way that their dominant hand that they write with. The position of the paper, I just said that. And the pencil grip, very important to make sure that their pencil grip is right when they're writing with their pencils or pens. We want to make sure that letters are formed correctly, that they're not just kind of making their own little slants as they go. I want to make sure that they were doing the letters correctly. I'd want to make sure that they're only coming up to the bottom line, not all the way back up to that middle dotted line when they're going to their next letter. So we make the distinction between those letters. Another thing is the letters parallel to each other. So you want the letters to obviously be touching. So I'd make sure that I show them all of that. So that would come to, we get a couple more bullet points. My anchor chart here isn't very stable, so we'd probably do 3, 4, 5. And then I'd have this anchor chart, once it's all decorated and cute, that the kids can understand and read, and also use the pictures to understand position of the paper, correct posture, what letters slanted means. Someone might be confused by that, so I put that in the picture of a slanted letter. And then once we go through that as a class, I would want them I would want myself to kind of make sure that they're getting a solid understanding. And then once that happens, that they would all go back to their desk, and I would pass out this handbook. So this handbook has the cursive letters that they can trace. So they would go through, and I kind of did an example here. So they would trace the letter, and then once they are comfortable tracing that letter, they would come down here and start doing it on their own. And then once they're comfortable with that, they would come down here and start connecting their letters. Once they feel comfortable connecting the letters, we're going to move on to words. So for this second page is words. And now this is all letters that begin with A. So I would probably pick out a couple simple letters, but then I'd pick out the harder letters that seem to be the letters that students struggle with more often than the easier letters, like the F, the S, the Z that I had up here for the little note cards. So this is still letters A. This is letter A words. So they would trace the letters or the words here, and then on this side they'd write it out themselves. So for example, I traced the word Alabama on this side, and then on this side I wrote it out myself. So then the third page, which I mean this handbook would obviously be a lot longer and have a lot more pages in it, but this is just the example. This is paragraph practice. So this is how I'd want my students to feel comfortable and confident writing. So they'd write through this paragraph, copy all of it, and then I'd want them to copy it down here on their own. So that is it for that. Throughout the rest of it, they could keep this booklet. I'd have a game on like their iPads or tablets, whatever they had to use during free time and that they can use at home. And we just keep practicing the letters every single day for the rest of the year. And hopefully them gaining confidence would allow them to feel more comfortable with their letters. That's it. Thanks.